Welcome and good evening. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Peter Noke for coming to give us this jazz talk and play for us. And while he is very busy giving jazz workshop in Hong Kong and in Singapore in the coming few days. Peter Noke is currently teaching piano and organ at Zephyr School and at the Lancaster University in UK. He was an examiner for Associate Board of Royal School of Music since 1990, and he is a member of the examiner training panel. He has also worked extensively across the globe as part of the team of mentors and partners for the Professional Development Department. As a performer, Mr. Noke has recorded for Hyperion Record and performed regularly in 2 piano partnerships with Julian Halaby. And he has also recorded a premiere recording of chamber music by Sir Malcolm Arnold. His diverse musical taste ranges from classical organ playing to jazz piano, from arrangements and compositions to a unique online resources for piano teachers. And we are very happy to have Mr. Noke today with us today. We are very much looking forward to hear and know more about jazz and listen to his playing. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Noke.
Well, thank you very much. No pressure then. Perhaps I shouldn't have written all that, but thank you very much. It's delightful to be here in Macao. It's marvellous to, and you may be surprised for me to start off by saying this, but I think the best thing about jazz is really to be involved in it, to experience it. So what I'm going to do to start with is a warm-up activity which involves all of you. So if you'd like to stand up.
Active learning. I love it. Arriba. Todos arriba.
Very simple. say, I hope I've started off on the right foot, because there's nothing worse than starting to talk and everyone goes, oh my goodness, what's the rest of the life? What I would like to do is really involve you in what I call the experience of jazz, because I know there are some musicians here and many non-musicians here. So I'm sort of taking the approach that I'm going through various ideas and experiences of jazz, some jazz history, its roots, talking about what matters in jazz. So what I'd love you to do is go away from this seminar saying, well, I must find out more, I really want to listen to a bit more of that. In terms of my own background, where I come from, I'm not born and bred a jazz musician. I grew up in a provincial English town as a chorister. I'm sure you can't imagine that now, but I did. My real love wasn't being a chorister, but my real love was the organ. It was a really powerful, fantastic instrument. And I learned the organ as a child. I also learned the piano. I had lots of interesting musical influences, including a teacher at school who was deeply into composing 20th century music, odd kind of stuff by people like John Cage, where we had things like water gongs. That's a gong which you put into a bucket and it changes its sound as it goes into the bucket. And things like break drums where you hit. And that was quite an interesting, very different experience from my church experience. And I was around in the days, believe it or not, of bands like Pink Floyd and Santana. That was a great influence on me as well. And I think I grew into liking jazz as time went on, and maybe as a reaction against classical music as well. I was very fortunate at college to have a great friend who I still know, who became a very famous composition in the 80s, a guy called Howard Jones. His probably most famous song is, gosh, I've forgotten it, Love, what's it called? Maybe you don't know Howard Jones, but anyway, Howard Jones, he was really big in the sort of 80s. You know, seeing someone like that so fired up with that sort of music is great. So the question is, what is jazz? Aaron Copland, the quite well-known 20th century American composer, was heard to say, well, the problem could be stated quite simply by asking, does music have a meaning? He said, well, my answer to that would be yes. The conversation then carries on, and can you state in so many words what that meaning is? My answer to that would be no, said Aaron Copland. So that's really helpful, isn't it? How long is a piece of string? If you really want to know what jazz is about, then take a look at this.
You know, fellas, there's all kind of music. And I'm a fucking music lover. I like good music, no matter what it is. There's like classical music.
kind of says it all, so that's the end of my lecture. Louis Armstrong said, "Man, if you've got to ask, you'll never know." But of course, what jazz involves most of all is that degree of improvisation. That was mostly what Ella Fitzgerald was doing. Ella Fitzgerald with Count Basie, and she exemplifies, for me, one of the greatest jazz singers of all time. I was fortunate enough actually to see her once with, I don't remember who she was with, but I saw her live once. She was getting into older years at that point in time, but she was still a most wonderful jazz singer. It may sound very obvious to state this, but I will do anyway, because all music, wherever it comes from, comes out of its geographical context and as a consequence of its social context as well. And nowhere is this more true, of course, than jazz, because jazz is a relatively young form in terms of the time it's been going. It has lots of connections with other music, which I'm going to explore later. But in terms of its social context, where does it come from? Well, it certainly has its roots not only in dance music to a certain extent, but also in African music, in songs. And in terms of the starting point for jazz, the ill treatment of black African Americans for many, many years after the end of the Civil War in 1865, when slavery was eventually abolished, sort of continued really right up way into the 1950s and 60s, of course. This is where a lot of the early jazz ideas came from, plantation songs while the workers were working, which grew into spirituals like this one.
Oh, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody
that very poignant performance there of that spiritual says a lot, really. Harking back to that first warm-up we did to the famous Billy Taylor song, "I Wish I Knew How It Feels to Be Free," to get rid of all the chains that are holding me. It's deeply embedded in the spirit of the early days of jazz, and certainly onwards as well. It's all part of the blues. The business map, the divisions in society, which were so apparent at the time, is something which influenced the style and the way jazz developed throughout this particular period now, around the turn of the century, between the 1890s and 1920. And the picture you see on the right is of a famous black jazz musician of the time called Scott Joplin. And Scott Joplin was one of those who sort of crossed the class barrier and made it into the upper classes. And he was famous, of course, for ragtime. And I'm going to play you a couple of ragtime pieces in a minute. Ragging, as it was called, is about the tune and doing free things around what the tune is. And it came out as a dance called the cakewalk, which classical composers like Debussy used as well. Cakewalk was essentially a means by which suppressed workers could actually take fun, make fun out of the upper classes and the dancing. Sorry. So what I would like to do now is to play one of Scott Joplin's perhaps most well-known rags, a rag called Maple Leaf. And that, of course, is characteristic as our pieces like The Entertainer. If we hark back to a long time ago, a film called The Sting, there was one of his slower and most beautiful rags was used quite a lot in that film. It's called Solace. So jazz was really a melting pot. And certainly by the time we got to the 1920s, America, of course, on Broadway was absolutely churning out shows like nothing on earth. A lot of them quite explicit. The high society, things were so completely different. There was a huge sense of optimism around there. People like Gershwin, of course, doing lots of shows. People like Jerome Kern. And I thought it was interesting to hear this particular song from one of his first hits, a musical called Sally, written in 1920. And it's called Look for the Silver Lining. Very interesting what the words are like. And of course, I got rhythm, Gershwin, all that kind of thing buzzing around. And here's a very short piece by Gershwin, a later piece, it's one of his preludes. We remember Gershwin maybe for Rhapsody or Blue more than anything else, but here's one of his short piano pieces, again buzzing with energy. Heyday of the 1920s and 1930s. The words for that, of course, sitting here in this wonderful domestic bliss, doing the dishes, and every cloud has its silver lining. Well, what clouds in comparison to this, which is of the 1930s? And it's one of those key events in racial hatred, racial tension, along with a few others. And it inspired somebody to write a poem about that, which was set to music. The poem is called Strange Fruit. For me, the most horrific thing about that picture is the fact that all the people staring on and jeering, of course, are white Americans. And this is Billie Holiday singing this very dark and very gruesome song. course, for many years after that, anyone who sang that song in any of the clubs was likely to get arrested and imprisoned. It was a very dangerous thing to actually do that. And the curious thing, of course, is that some musicians were the other side of that divide, and they were fine because they were in high society. And that particular time was one which spawned a lot of virtuosic piano playing, virtuosic trumpet playing, virtuosic singing, and it was great. And here is an interesting clip I thought I would play you because it's a piece called The Finger Breaker. And if you would like to see any more of this, just type in the name Dick Hyman, H-Y-M, and into YouTube, and you'll come up with this.
Well, if you like that kind of thing, maybe we ought to do something about Elder Old Martin, who has some bearing on that sort of kind of playing. I'd like to do a piece that Jelly Roll probably, I like to think that he challenged all the incumbent piano players with. This is his show-off piece called The Finger Breaker.
They're also effortless as well. That's incredible. And there were so many virtuoso pianists, particularly jazz pianists around at that time. The heyday maybe of classical pianists could be, I suppose, if you go back a century when Liszt was around, people like Chopin, people of that ilk. But certainly in terms of the jazz era, it was the 30s and 40s. And Fats Waller and Art Tatum are two names which spring to mind. And before I play you that short video clip, I'd like to play you Alligator Crawl, which is a great number from Fats Waller. There are these two geniuses side by side, and let me just play this. I should say this is fancy what we're playing.
Behind all that mugging, singing, and clowning, we just saw one of the great jazz pianists of the 30s, Thomas Fats Waller. Fats had so much talent in so many areas that piano playing seemed at times almost an afterthought. Yet he was so good on this instrument that other pianists, including Count Basie, looked up to him as their idol. He composed hundreds of tunes, including Squeeze Me, Honeysuckle Rose, and the one he just played, Ain't Misbehaving. Art Taylor was the other dominant piano player of the 30s, astounding everyone with his technique, most especially other piano players who were convinced he was playing the impossible. Once when Tatum walked into a club where Waller was playing, Waller acknowledged him by announcing to the audience, "I'm just a piano player, but tonight, God is in the house."
And Art Taylor was mine. He had such a fantastic developed ear that the story goes, if somebody put a pocket full of change down on the bar, he could tell exactly how much was there, what it sounded like. So what I'd like to do now is explore some of the connections, some of the reasons that jazz music is what it is, and also some of the connections with classical music, because there are a lot of connections there. Obviously, the most important thing is rhythm, and we experienced some of that right at the beginning. Now, I'd like to do the same kind of thing, this time with a blues number called Blues in the Night. And you notice from that, the very first clip I played with Ella Fitzgerald, Juba-doo-dah, all those scat syllables. Why on earth do singers use that? Well, because they want to emulate what the trumpeters, what the sax players are doing when they improvise, and they use these sort of nonsense scat syllables, do-ba-doo-dah. But you'll see why they use them in a minute, because it really does give the feel of swing. And of course, swing feel is one of the main feelings which give that particular style of jazz away. really laid-back, soulful version there of the blues. But essentially, that's what characterises that particular style, for example, from Latin music. And of course, the blues is a significant part of jazz, always has been, and still is in various things. And what we're talking about here is things like the form. So if I move over here, and this is perhaps a very appropriate named tune for this particular time in our history. It's called "Oh Lord, Please Don't Drop That Atomic Bomb on Me." Honestly, that's the title. It's very simple, really. It's terribly simple. It's just 4 bars of that, followed by 2 bars of that, 2 bars of that, and so on. And that particular form, of course, was what made up the standard blues. And of course, that's not the only blues. There's lots of blues forms: 8 bar, 16 bar, 32 bar. But what characterises the blues more than anything else is this. Scale. So if you want to sound bluesy, get yourself a piano and learn this scale. Not that many notes. The good thing about the blues scale is it will fit over any chord. So there's the first chord. It'll also fit over the next chord. At some point in time, it makes you feel a lot better. And that essential musical quality is something which we're going to explore further in a minute. The Latin feel differs, obviously, intensively. It differs in the feel and in what we call straight A's. It's a different kind of feel. And it's best to probably listen and experience in this, really, this is Latin rock, or yeah, come on back. Really upbeat. experienced at the beginning as well. And the harmony, in that sense, is very simple. It's just two chords. Just those two chords. Over which there's this wonderful sort of underlay, or overlay, however you want to call it, of rhythm, which pulsates this whole thing forward. Of course, there are much more subtle Latin styles as well, such as this particularly famous one. The Orpheum Eponema is that kind of classic Latin thing, isn't it? And everybody says, oh, I love it, I love it. And we'll have a look at some of the harmony in a minute and discover one of the reasons why it's such an exotic song. Of course, it's the old love song bit, the guy sitting in the bar every day with his coffee and his cigarette and walks past this beautiful-looking sun-tanned girl, and it goes, you know, oh, if only she'd look at me and notice me, but she goes straight by and doesn't notice him. Apart from the fact that the language gives it a certain exotic feel, the textures in the music are incredibly sparse. There's not much going on. There's this amazing feeling of space. And that's the original version by Carlos Gobin. So let's talk a bit more about the harmony there and what it is that makes it special. So essentially what we had in the blues was a major chord. And we put what we call a seventh on top of it, and it became this. And we had another major chord. And we put a seventh on top of that, and it became this. So the harmony itself is really quite simple. But what we have here is this. We have a major chord, and then we add another note to it. So if we think of a colour, a primary colour, into which we then put some other tint. Well, that's nice. And we can make that nicer by adding another one to it, and this is the ninth, the major ninth it's called. A lot of Go from Ipanema sort of centres around that, because actually if you play the tune on its own, it's nothing. When you put the harmony with it, itself is based on that. And then what happens in the middle is that it's the shifts of harmony which make this piece really what it is. I mean, so nice. Well, and that's another one. So we've got just two chords, and it's the shift, it's the change from one to the other. So as with anything, it's like the context. I'm interested in painting. One of my favourite British painters is a guy called Howard Hodgkin. I don't know whether you've seen his work or not, but Google him, Howard Hodgkin. He loves these primary colours, and his canvases are big, I mean big. And you walk into a gallery and there's this feast of colour. It really is very difficult to describe. It's really what this piece does in harmonic terms. So those two chords, we're treated to a musical sequence with slightly different chords. And again, for the third time, oh, heaven. Oh, it's got to be resolved, hasn't it? It's that tension. And the way it resolves, and of course the musical resolution can go either way, it can go down or up. It's so plain in comparison to going up. So you know you've reached home, but it's home with, it's got yellow. For me it's got yellow and orange, it's wonderful. And of course, this is not new. We go back centuries and we come to Bach, and Bach did all these kinds of things. Not quite in the same way, but he was revolutionary for his time. Of course, Jacques Lussier was the one person who explored all those things, how to turn Bach into swing. It's amazing. If you haven't seen Jacques Lussier or heard him, do that, because it is really a treat. So here's one of Bach's preludes in 48, Prelude and Fugue. So the second chord he uses is really what we call, in technical terms, a chord 2. That's a chord 1, that's a chord 2, but he turns it into a jazz chord 2. Oh, that's nice. That was a long time before Scott Joplin and all the rest of them. But actually Scott Joplin didn't use exotic harmony. So Bach was doing that kind of thing all the time, and altering harmony. Essentially what jazz does is it takes essential harmony and it changes things and it alters things. So whereas we have a chord which has to resolve to that, a jazz so the basic colour is there. We've got lots of sort of tints and hues around it. And Bach did similar things in this particular prelude, where he uses the harmonic dissonances to increase the tension. So we have these scrunchy bits. Tension is what gives the music its sense of structure and feeling. And of course, Beethoven was a great one for doing the same kind of thing. So, whereas Haydn and Mozart, of course, just did simple things, relatively well, Mozart did. No jazz there. Well, why should there be? It was Mozart. It was fantastic stuff on its own. But Beethoven, he had other ideas. So most composers would probably go to something like Beethoven went. That's another harmony became such that composers felt they could alter it and change it into some different form than it currently is. And that's certainly true of the last jazz musician I'm going to give you an example of, and that's a chap called Bill Evans. Bill Evans, before I do that, I'm just going to play you a short film of Miles Davis, who Bill Evans played with in the 1950s. Miles Davis, of course, was an iconic jazz musician in all kinds of ways because he revolutionized all kinds of things. And he introduced something called modal jazz into the world of jazz, particularly, at least in one of his particular phases of development. And modal jazz simply means that rather than with harmony, we often modal jazz, as we had in Boy You Come on That, we have one or two chords, and above that, you can find one scale that fits, like the blues scale. So if you know those notes, you can jam with it. They'll all fit, all the notes will actually fit. And it's the same with the black notes on the piano as well, pentatonic notes. If you play the black notes on the piano, it works. They all gel, they all kind of fit. So this short movie from Miles Davis.
The music written by Miles Davis echoes so much.
There are a number of musicians who you can tell who they are simply by the sound they make, the quality of what they do, and the way in which they do it. As I said, Bill Evans was, until about the 60s, he was part of Miles Davis's band. And Bill Evans is an interesting character because as a pianist he came from a classical background. And I think you can tell this in a lot of his playing, the way he plays, the way he balances chords as well. And I'd like to finish with a piece which he wrote, which is called Peace, which is a wonderful little piece. And I'll just show you, I think, where some of his ideas came from. So perhaps one of the interesting things is it doesn't have to be complicated to work. It can be simple. Chopin, of course, wrote the Berceuse. Goes on for 5 minutes, just over those simple two chords, chord 1 and chord 5. It's a beautiful piece. It becomes more heavily embellished as we go on. And a lot of the pieces we've heard this evening have also done a similar thing. And Bill Evans wrote a piece, well, it's mostly an improvised piece really, but it's based upon this simple chords sequence. It's much better than it's got a bit of class now. He used the principle of this, a very simple musical principle, meeting and then resolve it. That's the idea. Of course, it's how the idea is executed, but that's the principal idea. Yes, sorry, I meant to ask you, not before I disappeared, if you might ask questions, do please feel free to ask any questions you might have. I'll try and answer them as best I can. How many people have we got in the audience who actually play an instrument? Okay, cool. What instruments do you play?
Flute, harp, piano.
Flute, harp?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Guitar, piano, cello.
Oh, right, we've got enough here to have a jam session. You should have brought your instruments along. Yeah, good.
So as a trained pianist, what do you think show the difference between jazz playing, piano playing, and classical music playing?
Okay. Perhaps I can answer that here. The question was, if I understood it right, well, two things really. One is really what's the difference, and also I suppose if you're classically trained, how to get into it is another thing. I'm very fortunate really because I was going to say I'm not employed. I am, but I've never actually been in one job where I would say it's a full-time employed job. That's got its downside, it's got its great sides, because it means you can do lots of different things. And one of my really enjoyable parts of my life at the moment is teaching up at Sedler School. It's enjoyable partly because I've never taught in school before, it's always been higher education, or certainly privately. And it brings challenges. It brings challenges. For example, I had a lad who's called Bradley. Bradley's a rugby player, basically. He doesn't do piano, but he came to me, I don't know why, but he ended up with me to learn piano. So the question is, where do you start? Where do you start with somebody who doesn't read music, with somebody who's keen to do something, but what? And we did one or two simple left-hand things, because a lot of jazz stuff, it's like that very simple, oh Lord, please don't drop that bomb on me, the tune I played to you, but it's a very simple, very easy tune. And it's quite easy to teach people by ear, more so, I believe, than it is to teach them from notation. Bradley, I taught him one or two things, and he came along the next week and he said, can I play you this? And he played, I think it was a Coldplay song, relatively simple one for the piano part, but he played the song and he sang. That was 3.5 minutes worth of music, and I said, well, that's fantastic. How did you learn that? And he said, oh, I learned it from YouTube. Great. So he listened to it and copied it, and I said, well, how long did that take you? And he said, oh, about half an hour. So the proof of the pudding really is in the eating. So jazz musicians, by and large, learn by ear. It's much quicker, it's much more secure. I count myself in the group of people who've learned traditionally by notation. Therefore, most of my musical world is one that is secure, it's a visual one, and the oral one, of course, it's developed, but it's not developed in the same way that someone who's grown up all the time in jazz has. So the key to it is listening and listening and listening, basically. Jazzers do things back to front, so it really confuses us as classical musicians, whereas classical musicians might play. So, jazz musicians will play. They'll do that. It's back to front phrasing. We don't do that. It's terribly confusing. So that's one of the reasons why it can be quite hard. And the other thing is this: start with easy things, and there's a lot of good books out there which do teach early jazz styles and early improvisation. Cecil Board, of course, have a fantastic series of books based around jazz exams, not just for piano but for all instruments. Whilst they don't do jazz exams internationally at the moment anymore, the books are still on sale, and they're fantastic books. It's Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music. They have a series of jazz exams, grade 1 to 5, for piano, but also for flute, clarinet, saxophone, trumpet, trombone. And the reason for saying that is because, apart from piano, ironically, all the other disciplines have backing tracks with you. And actually, to have a backing track with you is what you need if you're a pianist. Because if you play any other instrument, chances are you'll be in an orchestra, a band, you'll play with your teacher, copying that kind of thing. Whereas the pianist very rarely does that sort of thing. So I think it's a question of getting into the right musical environment. Backing tracks are great. Sorry, that was a bit of a long answer, wasn't it? Yeah. No.
How should I say? I compose song, but mainly in pop.
Yeah.
I'm trying to sound it more jazzier. So where should I start? If I'm not trying to change much the melody, shall I start in the modes or in the chords, or where should I start?
Yes. If you want to change what you do dramatically, if you try doing what you do in a swing style, that will straight away sort of change it. You can also change it in terms of the harmony, depending on what kind of harmony you sort of use. And there are some good books out there which talk about jazz harmony. It tends to get quite complicated quite soon. But if you want to do something that's got a more jazzy feel, like a rock jazz feel, like some of those tunes we've heard today, again, listening is one of the best ways to go about doing that. Developing the rhythm so it's less on the beat. A lot of, I'm not saying a lot of all pop music, but a lot of pop music has, it's not kind of to one side in quite the same way as, let's say, a rock jazz piece is. I don't know whether that makes sense.
If I show you, will you try to just hear it for me?
I could do, yes, yes. And you can do the boogie bass on all of those changes. And on G as well. Okay, or just a simple bass like that. If you want that kind of feel, it depends what sort of feel you want. You know, that might not be what you're after. Or is it more to do with the feel of the way it's played?
I think we're both, as long as sound better or maybe free or maybe I don't want to play always the same, but try to improvise all through the end.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I know what you mean. Well, once you have an idea that works, it's easy to stick to it, isn't it? Yeah, and not explore. What I would do is a number of things. Explore some bass lines that you can. There are a number of bass lines without going into in great detail. One is something like that. The other is something like a walking bass line. A walking bass line is great because you can. A walking bass line basically does that on the beat stuff. So that's a number of ways you can change the bass line. Essentially, you've got the bass and you've got what's going on over the top. You use some sort of loose scaling things, didn't you, as well, which is fine. And if you want to develop the right hand, so you put more chords in the right hand, because what you're doing is, as a player, if you play jazz on the piano, you're doing what usually other things do. You've got the rhythm section, because you've got to make it sound jazzy. So if I've got a walking bass, I can make it go. Sound sort of jazzy, but then I'm not tuned. So you can swap between doing the bass. The bass is always going to be there because it has to be. Your right hand can play either chords to keep the rhythm going, or it can actually play the tune as you were doing over the top. There's a mixture of those kinds of styles. I hope that's a start anyway.
And then how do I know I'm playing jazz?
Well, that's a good thing. Well, one of the best things is listen to yourself playing. Yeah, listen to yourself play. Do ba do ba do ba do ba do. Okay. Do ba do ba do ba do. If you all say do ba do ba do ba do. Ah, do ba do. Can you all say it? 1, 2. Do ba do ba do ba do. Do ba do ba do ba do. So if you ever play a phrase. Jazz, we go do ba do ba do. Does that make sense? So what I would do first of all, is take what you've got and actually record it, listen to it, and then listen to some swing style stuff. Think of the do, ba, do, ba, do, ba, do. But the emphasis comes not on each beat, but on the sort of syncopated quaver, the short note in between. Long, short, long, short, long, short, long. Classically, we do long, short, long, short, long, short, long. Yeah? The other thing is listen to some Jacques Lussier, because he's a great one for doing stuff in more or less a classical way and then turning it into swing.